the Eternal City. Stand on the walls of York in northern England today, and you are standing exactly where Roman soldiers stood watch nearly 2,000 years ago. Walk through the Shambles, those leaning, timber-framed streets, and you are following roads first laid down by Vikings over 1,000 years ago. Touch the ancient stones of the Minster, and you are touching a building that took 2.5 centuries to complete. This is a city that has refused to die. Emperors have taken their last breath within these walls. Kings have governed all of England from here. Armies have besieged it. Plague has swept through its streets. Bombs have fallen from the sky. And through everything, through every catastrophe that history has thrown at it, this is the story of York. 2,000 years. Let us begin. It is 71 AD. The Roman 9th Legion is pushing deep into hostile territory in the wild north of Britannia, chasing British tribes who refuse to bend the knee to Rome. They are 5,000 men, battle-hardened veterans who have fought across the breadth of the empire, from the deserts of North Africa to the plains of Gaul. They have seen everything, and yet nothing has prepared them for this: the rain, the cold, the gray skies of northern Britain. They reach a strategic confluence where two rivers meet, the Ouse and the Foss, and there they stop, not to rest, to stay. They plant their standards in the earth. They dig ditches. They raise timber walls. They call this new fortress Eboracum. It is the beginning of York. Within a generation, Eboracum is no longer a temporary military camp. It is a city in the making. The 9th Legion builds bathhouses and barracks, temples and administrative halls. They construct roads that cut straight across the British landscape like scars of civilization. Merchants follow the legions. Civilians build homes beyond the fortress walls. A community takes root. And then, the mystery. Sometime in the early 120s AD, the 9th Legion vanishes from all historical record. 5,000 soldiers, their eagle standards, their equipment, their names, gone. Historians have debated this disappearance for centuries. Some say they were wiped out in battle. Others say they were transferred to the Eastern Empire. The truth remains one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. The 6th Legion arrives to take their place, and Eboracum enters a new era. 3 centuries of Roman occupation will follow. In 211 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus arrives in York, old, exhausted, and dying, after campaigning against the Caledonian tribes to the north. He has spent the final years of his reign trying to conquer Scotland, and failing. He draws his last breath in Eboracum at the very northern edge of his empire, the greatest empire the world has ever known. His death triggers a crisis. His sons Caracalla and Geta are both present in York, and both want sole power. Caracalla will eventually murder his own brother to get it. But first, in York, he makes a decision. This fortress city becomes the capital of Britannia Inferior, governing half of Roman Britain from these streets. And then comes the moment that changes everything. The year is 306 AD. Emperor Constantius dies in York. His soldiers gather around the body of their dead emperor, and they look to his son, a young man of remarkable intelligence and ambition. They raise their swords, and they proclaim him Emperor of Rome. His name is Constantine, and the decision made by Roman legionaries on a cold morning in northern England will redirect the entire course of Western civilization. Constantine does not merely rule the empire, he transforms it. He legalizes Christianity, ending 3 centuries of brutal persecution. He moves the imperial capital to Constantinople. He reshapes the structure of power across the ancient world. And it all begins here, in York. A bronze statue of Constantine stands outside the Minster to this very day, a monument to the fact that the modern Western world, in ways most people never consider, traces its origins to this city. By 314 AD, York has its own bishop. Christianity is no longer persecuted. It is the establishment. The fortress city born of war has become a center of faith and imperial power. When Rome finally withdraws from Britain in the early 5th century, when the greatest empire the ancient world has ever seen simply collapses under its own weight and the pressure of barbarian migrations, York does not fall with it. The walls still stand. The streets still exist. People remain. The Anglo-Saxons do not conquer an abandoned ghost town. They inherit a living city, and they make it their own. Eboracum becomes Eoforwic. The Latin names fade. The Roman temples crumble. Stone is stripped from walls to build new structures. The carefully engineered Roman roads disappear beneath mud and centuries of new construction. For 200 years, the city quietly adapts to a post-Roman world. Then, on Easter Day in 627 AD, something remarkable happens. King Edwin of Northumbria, a pagan warrior king who spent his entire life fighting for power, who came to rule through war and cunning, walks into a small, simple wooden church in the heart of the old Roman city, and he allows himself to be baptized. One man's conversion might seem like a footnote, but Edwin is not just one man. He is a king, and when kings convert, kingdoms follow. Christianity sweeps across Northumbria like wildfire. Churches are built, monasteries are established, scholars arrive, and York becomes the epicenter of this Christian transformation of the North. That small wooden church where Edwin is baptized will, over the following centuries, be rebuilt, expanded, rebuilt again, and finally transformed into one of the greatest Gothic cathedrals ever constructed. But that is a story for later. By 735 AD, York's bishop has been elevated to archbishop, placing this city on equal footing with Canterbury. England no longer has one Christian center. It has two, and York is one of them. The city then produces something extraordinary, a scholar whose influence will shape European thought for the next 2 centuries. Alcuin of York becomes master of the cathedral school in 778 AD. Under his guidance, the school becomes one of the most renowned centers of learning in all of Europe. Monks travel from distant corners of the continent to study here. When Charlemagne, the most powerful ruler in the post-Roman Western world, emperor of the Franks, decides to reform education across his vast empire, he does not choose any scholar from Rome or Paris or the great monasteries of Germany. He chooses Alcuin from York. This is York's golden age of learning. While much of Europe struggles in the aftermath of Rome's collapse, York keeps the flame of knowledge burning. Libraries, scholarship, the written word. This city preserves what others have abandoned. But across the gray waters of the North Sea, other men are building ships and sharpening weapons. November 866 AD, before dawn. The longships come up the River Ouse in the darkness. Hundreds of them, thousands of warriors, Danish and Norwegian, comprising the Great Heathen Army that has already torn a path of destruction across eastern England. They surround the city before the sun rises. The Anglo-Saxon defenders never stand a chance. By nightfall, the Vikings hold York. They rename it Jorvik, and they do not merely occupy it, they completely rebuild it. This is not a raid. This is colonization on a massive scale. Viking families settle here. Craftsmen establish workshops. Merchants create trade routes connecting Jorvik to Dublin to Scandinavia to the wider Norse world. The city's population grows dramatically. At its height, Jorvik may be home to 10,000 people, an extraordinary number for the 9th century. The Vikings mint their own coins here. They establish their own laws. They build their own culture. When archaeologists excavated the Coppergate site in York in the 1970s, they made discoveries that shocked the historical world. Viking streets were found so perfectly preserved beneath the soil that leather from their workshops, wood from their buildings, even seeds from their kitchen gardens had survived 1,000 years underground. The Jorvik Viking Center, which opened in 1984, was built around these extraordinary finds. Jorvik hums with industry. Metalworkers, jewelers, woodcarvers, leatherworkers, all working in narrow, bustling streets. It is, by any measure, one of the most important cities in the Viking world. But Viking rule is inherently unstable. Kings rise and fall through violence. The last Viking king of York carries a name that tells you everything you need to know about the culture. Eric Bloodaxe. That is his actual name, earned through actual brutality. In 954 AD, Eric Bloodaxe is killed in battle at Stainmore, and the Viking kingdom of York dies with him. For a brief, fragile moment, York is simply English again. That peace lasts almost exactly 1 century. 1066, the year that shatters English history.
Norwegian Vikings come first, trying to reclaim what their ancestors lost. King Harold Godwinson marches his army north at incredible speed and meets the Norse invaders at Stamford Bridge, just outside York. He destroys them utterly. The Viking Age for England is effectively over. Harold celebrates in York. He has saved the North. He has protected his kingdom. He believes the worst is past. Then the riders arrive from the south. William of Normandy has landed with an army on the southern coast of England. Harold marches his exhausted army 200 miles south in 4 days. He reaches Hastings. He fights, and he dies there, with an arrow in the eye, or so the legend goes. William wins, and he rides north to claim his new kingdom. William of Normandy, soon to be known as William the Conqueror, arrives in York in 1068. He looks at this city that has withstood Roman legions and Viking armies, and he gives one order: build me a castle.
York Castle is constructed with brutal efficiency. William stations a garrison there to ensure the city understands who rules England now. The people of York have other ideas. In 1069, they rebel. They ally with a Danish invasion force, storm York Castle, and slaughter every single Norman soldier inside. For one brief, glorious moment, York is free again. William's response is the most catastrophic act of deliberate destruction in English history. He unleashes the harrying of the North. His soldiers burn every village from York to Durham, every farm, every field, every food store, every building. They slaughter livestock. They destroy everything that could sustain human life. The chroniclers who witnessed it struggled to find words adequate to describe what they saw. People starved in their thousands. Some turned to cannibalism. Yorkshire became a wasteland that would never. William rebuilt York Castle, and this time there would be no rebellion. The Norman message was written in ash and bone: defy us, and we will turn your world to nothing. But life, stubbornly, continues. Slowly, painfully, York recovers. Trade resumes. The Minster begins its long transformation from a timber Anglo-Saxon church to a stone Norman cathedral. And York acquires something unexpected: a saint. In 1153, Archbishop William returns to York after years of exile. The entire city turns out to welcome him home. So many people crowd onto Ouse Bridge to catch a glimpse of their beloved archbishop that the bridge collapses beneath them, hurling hundreds of people into the river below. And then, the miracle. Not a single person drowns. Not one life is lost. William's tomb in the Minster becomes a pilgrimage destination, drawing visitors from across England. York now has its own holy man, its own miraculous story. But 1190 brings a horror that stains York's history to this day. England is mobilizing for the Third Crusade. Anti-Jewish violence erupts across the country. In York, a mob gathers and turns on the Jewish community. The city's Jewish residents seek refuge in Clifford's tower, the wooden keep of York Castle. For days, the mob besieges them, demanding conversion or death. On the night of March 16th, 1190, facing certain massacre, many of those inside choose to die by their own hands rather than surrender to the mob. Those who come out hoping for mercy are murdered regardless. Around 150 people die that night. The exact number will never be known. The shame, however, endures, acknowledged and mourned to this day. York is wealthy, powerful, connected to royal authority, but it is also capable of terrible darkness. In 1212, King John, possibly the worst king England has ever endured, does something remarkable for York. He grants the city powers of self-governance. York can now run its own affairs, collect its own taxes, administer its own justice. It is, in effect, an independent city-state within England. This is not generosity, it is commerce. York has grown staggeringly rich from the wool trade. English wool is
in Europe, and York is one of the primary centers for processing and exporting it. King John wants a share of that wealth. To get it, he trades autonomy for money. In 1298, King Edward I, Longshanks, the Hammer of the Scots, does something even more extraordinary. He moves the entire English government to York. Not just himself, but everything. The treasury, the exchequer, the law courts, the complete administrative machinery of the English kingdom. For 6 years, if you want to do business with the English government, you come to York. York is not just important, it is temporarily the capital of England. The Scots take notice. In 1319, they raid south with devastating speed and come right to the walls of York, killing the city's mayor in the fighting. This is no distant war. This is battle at the city gates. In 1328, King Edward III marries Philippa of Hainaut in York Minster. The ceremony draws the flower of European nobility to the city. York is at the absolute peak of its medieval glory. And then, as it has done so many times before,
catastrophe arrives without warning. 1349. The Black Death. Plague sweeps into York like a shadow. It moves through the cramped medieval streets with merciless efficiency, jumping from house to house, person to person. There is no understanding of how disease spreads. There is no way to stop it. People die in their homes, in the streets, at their workbenches. The death carts cannot keep up. Between a third and half of York's entire population dies within months. The economic collapse is immediate and total. Trade stops, workshops stand empty, fields go untended. The city survives, but recovery takes decades, and the population never fully returns to its pre-plague levels.
The 15th century brings new conflicts, not of plague, but of politics and faith. Archbishop Richard Scrope stands before his congregation and preaches rebellion. The taxes are too high, he declares, the king's rule too corrupt, the people too oppressed. Scrope is one of the most powerful churchmen in all of England, and he is calling for uprising. King Henry IV responds with ruthless, calculated efficiency. He has Scrope arrested, tried for treason, and beheaded. England is shocked. Archbishops are not supposed to be executed. They are supposed to be untouchable, protected by the church, by God, by centuries of sacred tradition. Henry IV does not care about tradition. Scrope's head comes off. His body is buried in York Minster. But England has been consuming itself in a catastrophic civil war. 1455, the country descends into dynastic conflict. Two branches of the same royal family, both descended from King Edward III, are fighting to the death for the throne of England. The conflict becomes known as the Wars of the Roses. On one side, the House of Lancaster with the red rose. On the other, the House of York with the white rose. York, the city, is not merely caught up in this war. It is at the very heart of it. The white rose flies from these walls. Yorkist armies march from these streets. When a Yorkist sits on the throne, York prospers and is favored. When a Lancastrian wins, York suffers. 3 kings from the House of York rule England. Edward IV, who seizes the throne through military brilliance. His young son, Edward V, who reigns for just 2 months before vanishing into the Tower of London, never to be seen again. And Richard III, the most controversial and debated of them all. To the rest of England, Richard III has long been portrayed as a villain, a hunchbacked murderer who killed his own nephews to steal the crown. That is largely Tudor propaganda. To York, Richard III is something entirely different. He is a patron, a benefactor, someone who genuinely understands and cares about the North. When he rides through these streets, people cheer. When he grants the city new privileges, the gratitude is genuine. Richard is York's king, in a way that no southern monarch ever was. Then comes August 22nd, 1485, Bosworth Field. Richard III fights Henry Tudor's forces in the muddy fields of Leicestershire. He charges directly at Henry Tudor himself, coming within sword's length of ending the battle personally. But he is cut off, surrounded, and cut down. The last Yorkist king falls in the mud, and with him dies the House of York's claim to the English throne forever. York mourns. The Tudors have won. A new dynasty begins. And they have no love for the North, no special affection for this city. For York, it feels like conquest.
The White Rose is finished. By 1530, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey serves as Archbishop of York, though he has barely visited his own archdiocese. Wolsey is far more than an archbishop. He is the second most powerful man in England, the man who actually runs the country while King Henry VIII feasts and hunts. His wealth is extraordinary. His power seems unassailable. Then he makes one fatal mistake. He fails to deliver Henry's divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Henry wants Anne Boleyn. He wants a male heir. He wants the marriage dissolved. When Wolsey cannot persuade the Pope to grant the annulment, Henry strips him of everything. Wolsey dies in 1530, broken, disgraced, and abandoned. 6 years later, all of northern England erupts. The Pilgrimage of Grace. 40,000 men, women, and families march together under the banner of the 5 Wounds of Christ. They are protesting Henry's break with Rome, the destruction of the monasteries, the assault on the Catholic faith they have known their entire lives. York stands at the center of this rebellion, the largest popular uprising in Tudor England. Henry crushes it with characteristic ruthlessness. The leaders are executed. The dissolution continues. By 1539, York's great monasteries, St. Mary's Abbey, Holy Trinity Priory, places that have stood for centuries, that have preserved learning and cared for the sick and fed the poor, are stripped of everything valuable and left to crumble. The spiritual heart of York is torn out. But the Catholic community does not disappear. They go underground, practicing their faith in secret rooms, hiding priests in concealed chambers built into the walls and floors of ordinary houses, risking everything. In 1586, Margaret Clitheroe pays the ultimate price. She is a butcher's wife living in the Shambles. She has been harboring Catholic priests, men who are hunted as traitors simply for saying Mass. When she is arrested, she refuses to enter a plea. She knows that if she pleads, her children could be forced to testify, could be tortured for information. So she says nothing. Her punishment? She is pressed to death. A door is laid on top of her body, and stones are piled upon that door. Weight added slowly, methodically, crushing her over the course of hours. She dies in agony, protecting her children with her silence. Today, Margaret Clitheroe is a Catholic saint. Her house in the Shambles is a shrine visited by pilgrims from around the world. 1644. England is at war again. But this time, the conflict is internal. King versus Parliament. Royalist versus Roundhead. York declares for King Charles I. Parliament sends an army to deal with the city. 20,000 soldiers besiege York for 11 weeks. Inside the walls, food runs out. People starve. Disease spreads. The city endures. The Royalists attempt to break the siege at the Battle of Marston Moor. Fought just outside York, it is one of the largest battles ever fought on English soil. Oliver Cromwell commands the parliamentary cavalry. The Royalists are annihilated. 4,000 men die in a single afternoon. York surrenders. King Charles I will lose his head 5 years later, in 1649. The age of absolute monarchy in England is ending. York, exhausted after centuries of warfare, military, religious, political, needs peace. And finally, slowly, it begins to find it. The 18th century is calmer, quieter. York reinvents itself as a fashionable Georgian city, a center for horse racing, theater, and polite society. The ancient walls become a pleasant walk rather than a defensive necessity. The medieval streets become charming rather than merely functional. But York still knows how to attract a crowd for the wrong reasons. April 7th, 1739, Dick Turpin climbs the ladder to the gallows at Knavesmire, York's public execution ground. Turpin is a criminal, a highwayman, a thief, almost certainly a murderer. But in death, mythology takes over. The romantic story of him riding from London to York in a single night on his black horse, Black Bess, complete fiction, invented by a novelist decades after Turpin's death. But the legend sticks. Thousands turn out to watch him hang. Hang. In Georgian England, executions are public entertainment. 6 years later, the gallows at Knavesmire are busy again. 22 Jacobite rebels are executed here after Bonnie Prince Charlie's failed attempt to restore a Catholic Stuart to the English throne. The 1745 rebellion came terrifyingly close to succeeding. Its failure and the executions in York send a clear message about the price of challenging the established order. February 1st, 1829. Jonathan Martin hides in York Minster as evening service ends. He waits in complete silence as the last worshippers leave, as the priests depart, as the doors are locked and darkness settles over the cathedral. Then he emerges from hiding, with candles, with prayer books, and with an unshakable conviction that God himself has commanded him to burn the minster to the ground.
He piles cushions and wooden benches beneath the medieval choir stalls. He sets them alight. The fire takes hold rapidly. By the time anyone outside notices, the ancient timber roof of the choir is fully engulfed. The minster burns through the night. The medieval roof timbers, centuries old, the intricately carved choir stalls, generations of irreplaceable craftsmanship, all reduced to ash and cinders. Martin is caught the following day. He is declared insane. He is locked away for the rest of his life. The minster is rebuilt, more magnificent than before. 1830 brings something genuinely new. The Yorkshire Museum is constructed in the ruins of St. Mary's Abbey, built in Greek Revival style. For the first time, York treats its ancient past as something to be preserved, studied, and celebrated, rather than merely inhabited. And then, in 1839, the railway arrives. George Hudson, a draper's son from Yorkshire, who will become one of the most influential figures in the history of the British railway system, makes York the hub of his railway empire. The city explodes with growth. Railway workshops employing thousands of men, new stations, hotels, warehouses, industry on a scale York has never seen. Suddenly, London is 5 hours away instead of 2 days. The ancient city that spent centuries in relative isolation is now connected to the entire country. Tourists flood in, middle-class Victorian families who can now afford a weekend trip to see the medieval
walls and the Minster, to walk the streets of the Shambles and stand where emperors once stood. York has been many things across the centuries: Roman fortress, Viking capital, royal seat of power. Now it becomes something entirely new, a tourist destination, a place where people come to experience history rather than to make it. Then comes a date that every person in York remembers: April 29th, 1942. Air raid sirens sound across York at 2:30 in the morning. People stumble from their beds in confusion. Why would German bombers target York? There are no factories here, no military installations of strategic significance. They do not understand. This is not a military raid. This is cultural warfare. The Germans call them the Baedeker raids, named after the famous German tourist guidebook. Adolf Hitler has ordered his Luftwaffe to bomb Britain's most historically and culturally significant cities in direct retaliation for RAF raids on German cultural sites: Bath, Exeter, Canterbury, Norwich, and York. The bombers come in waves. Incendiary devices rain down, designed specifically to start fires that will spread through the ancient timber buildings of the medieval city. The Guildhall, which has stood since the 15th century, burns to the ground. Row after row of medieval houses catch fire. The sky above York glows bright orange. The Minster should burn. Incendiary bombs land directly on its ancient roof. But volunteer firefighters, ordinary men and women, civilians, climb onto the roof in the middle of the raid and put out the fires before they can take hold. They save it. When morning comes and the all-clear sounds, 92 people are dead. Hundreds are homeless. Large sections of medieval York are smoking ruins. But the Minsters. York rebuilds. Again, as it has always rebuilt. In 1963, the University of York is founded, bringing thousands of young people to a city that has always been defined by its past, forcing it to think about its future. In 1975, the National Railway Museum opens, celebrating York's Victorian transformation. In 1984, the Jorvik Viking Center opens, using the extraordinary discoveries from the Coppergate excavations to recreate Viking York so vividly that visitors can walk through reconstructed streets, see Viking craftsmen at work,
and experience the city as it was 1,000 years ago. History is no longer something you simply read about in York. It is something you can step inside. 2,000 years, 70 generations, one city. This city has witnessed the absolute best and worst of what human beings are capable of. Constantine's world-changing vision, Viking ingenuity and craftsmanship, medieval scholarship that kept knowledge alive when Europe was at its darkest, unspeakable violence, unshakable faith, the courage of a butcher's wife who chose death over betraying her children, the determination of ordinary firefighters who climbed onto a burning roof while bombs fell around them to save a cathedral that has stood for 8 centuries. If you are from York, this is your heritage. This is what your city has endured and what it has achieved. If you are not from York, you have just learned why this city matters, not just to England, but to the story of Western civilization itself. Through everything, York has survived, then thrived. History is not just something that happened, it is something that shaped us. And York has shaped more history than